Hey everyone, I'm Joe, and today I'm finally here to give you guys my spoiler-filled thoughts on Avengers Endgame. Sorry for this review being late. I had to let some time go by so enough people could see it by now. It's been a couple weeks. Plus I had to see it again because I wanted to see if there was anything else that I missed. And certain things didn't make sense to me on the first viewing, so I wanted to make sure that it was clear in my mind as I could. So I saw this movie last night for the second time, and I have to say that I liked it even more. If you've seen any of my posts on my YouTube channel, Facebook page, this movie is just everything I wanted it to be and everything that I never knew that I wanted it to be. And in case you guys didn't get it the first time around, there's gonna be spoilers, so here's the countdown.
7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Shall we begin?
Let the games begin.
First of all, I have to give huge props to Marvel for being able to keep all the secrets that this movie has. Because watching the trailers, most of the stuff that they show is from the first act of the movie, and with little bits of the final act sprinkled throughout. Marvel has been very conscious and very mindful about what they want to get out to certain people who haven't seen it by now. So you guys, if you're watching this, you did a great job of keeping this as tight-lipped as possible. The movie opens up pretty much what I expected it to open up with, in a very dour and desperate kind of feeling. Now, it opens up with Hawkeye hanging out with his family, which you know exactly where that's leading. You see Hawkeye training his daughter to fire an arrow, and his wife and kids are getting ready for a barbecue. The camera focuses on him and it looks away, then he turns back to look for his daughter. She's gone. Then he looks to see that his family's disappeared. He doesn't know where they're at. And then you see Tony Stark and Nebula stuck in the Guardian ship in the middle of space where it's run out of gas, they have no food or water, and it's only a matter of time before they die. The tone of this opening and this scene in particular is just very quiet and somber and just bleak. And you don't really see that too much in a Marvel movie. Pretty much feeds off right from the end of Infinity War with that really haunting ending. Goes right into the beginning of this movie. And it takes place about 20 days after Thanos snapped his fingers. And Captain Marvel shows up, rescues Tony and Nebula, brings them to Earth, and Tony's reunited with Pepper Potts, who survived the snap. Thanks to Nebula, they're able to figure out where Thanos is hiding in this remote, uncharted planet somewhere in the farthest reaches of the galaxy. And they figure out that he used the stones again. So they decide to head off to the planet and finish him off for good and get the stones back. Thanos is hanging out in his little hut, enjoying his retirement. They storm the place, and after interrogating him, they reveal that when he used the stones, he destroyed them as a failsafe, just in case the remaining Avengers decided to strike back. It wasn't that surprising, because I could see what Thanos will do anything to make sure that what he did isn't reversed. But then he dies. Thor decapitates him, saying, "I went for the head." An obvious callback to Infinity War, where he said, "You should have gone for the head." But what really surprises me is that the movie cuts to 5 years later in the year 2023. That was quite a shock. The world, for the most part, has moved on, or is trying to move on. Everybody's in a different place. Captain America is leading a self-help group. Tony and Pepper are married and they have a daughter named Morgan. And I really like seeing just where the world ended up and where these characters ended up in the 5 years since then. Trying to figure out some way, shape, or form to move on from what happened, but they still can't let it go. This is probably the first time, maybe ever, that all these characters in the MCU actually feel like real people. Yes, they've been humanized in the previous films in some capacity, but this is probably the first time that you could actually feel like these are real people, that they're human. Even though one of them's a god, you could still sense their humanity and how they cope with what they've lost in their own various ways. But then, in this mysterious warehouse in Scott Lang's van, a rat steps on a button and Scott Lang returns from the quantum realm 5 years later, but it turns out he was stuck in there for 5 hours. And he's walking around trying to figure out what's going on, and after learning about the snap, by visiting this monument, he sees his name on one of the placards, and he goes to this house, and this young girl shows up. It's his daughter, Cassie, who's aged 5 years older now, and it's a really emotional reunion because Scott has tried so hard to be there for his daughter, but something, one way or another, always keeps pulling the rug out from underneath him. Only this time, it was Thanos' fault, not Scott's. And you know, Paul Rudd is hilarious. I really like that guy, even though I'm not a huge fan of some of his movies. Seeing him getting really scared, looking at the names, trying to figure out, is Cassie's name on there? I really bought the fear in his voice, and seeing how scared he was, Paul Rudd did a great job in that scene, especially when he's reunited with his daughter. Oh, That's one of the many times where that really hit me emotionally. So he arrives at Avengers headquarters and tells them where he's been this entire time. And he tells them that he has an idea of time travel. Since the quantum realm operates differently in the real world, in their world, they can manipulate it in order to travel to certain points in their past and retrieve the Infinity Stones and find a way to bring everybody back. So they show up to Tony Stark's house, who might know a thing or two about time travel or quantum physics, but he turns him down out of fear of losing his daughter Morgan. But it turns out he was actually working on time travel the entire time. And it's after another conversation with Pepper that he decides to follow through with it. Not before they recruit Bruce Banner or Professor Hulk, which this movie, as some people have pointed out, does take a few risks, Bruce Banner being one of them. Some people have been put off by this. I myself am a little bit iffy on it. I'm okay with it, but at the same time, not entirely. Bruce Banner is in the Hulk's body, but with Bruce's personality and his intellect. He's at a point now in life where he's finally accepted what's inside of him, and he's learned to use the brain versus brawn, the best of both worlds. Seems pretty reasonable, considering that Bruce Banner, with his intellect, would be able to figure this out eventually. And it's another way of keeping the Hulk unique and interesting and compelling, because it's really easy to do the whole roar, Hulk smash, and all that kind of stuff. After a while, it gets pretty tired, and they found various ways throughout the MCU films to make the Hulk interesting and refreshing in some way. Some fans might not like that. I'm okay with it, but still, there were a few times though where I went, it does have its moments though, especially when he gets a picture with the kids, and Scott says, "You want a picture with me? I'm Ant-Man," and the kids are like, no. Oh, come on, take a picture. You know what, it's fine. Oh, come on, you feel bad. Take the goddamn phone. And another risk that this movie takes is with Thor. At this point, Thor and the remaining Asgardians, which I'm guessing is a quarter of the population of Asgard that managed to survive not only the destruction of Asgard and the snap, it's about a quarter of them that are living in this harbor town and somewhere in Norway. Valkyrie's watching over the people there, and Thor's hanging out in this hut, and it's just about to become a full-blown alcoholic. And he has a beer gut. He's a pretty big fat slob. Not hugely fat, but he's got a big beer gut. And I thought it was hilarious. I loved it, although some of the comedic timing doesn't entirely work for me. I thought it was great, and Chris Hemsworth sells the hell out of it. He's probably one of the most underrated aspects of the MCU. And despite the fact that he has a beer gut, at the climax when he fights Thanos, he dons a suit and uses the Stormbreaker, or Mjolnir, and he fights Thanos and his army anyway. He doesn't use some kind of a spell or whatever to revert back to his bodybuilder type of image. Some have pointed out, like Chris Stuckman, that you don't have to look like a Maxim model in order to be a superhero. And I like that personally. But I can easily see diehard Thor fans being like, why the heck did you do that? That is the dumbest thing I've ever seen. And trust me, I get it, I do. But for myself, I thought in service of the story, it was a plus. Not to mention he yells at a guy over a headset about Fortnite. Yes, go ahead and cry, you little weasel. Go home to your mother. As far as the time travel aspect, leading up to this movie, watching the trailers, I couldn't help but wonder, they're gonna go back in time somehow. Seeing them wear the quantum suits, the white suits that Scott Lang gives them, and there were certain images, like this image for instance, where it looked very similar to the Battle of New York in the first Avengers movie. Because at first I thought they were just gonna use the time stone and go back in time into certain spots in order to get the stones back. And that image that I mentioned earlier, that made me think, are they gonna go back in time to the Battle of New York and get the stones? And it turns out they actually do. They go to certain movies and certain events in the timeline, like Thor: The Dark World and the first Guardians of the Galaxy, in order to retrieve the stones. And when they go back to New York City, that's when I went, I knew it! They go back to New York. I knew they would do that. It's not one of those things where you go, oh, that's so predictable. I saw it coming a mile away. No. I wanted to see that. I think a lot of people wanted to see that because I wanted to see what that would bring about. And I'm not the first one to say this, but it definitely is very reminiscent of Back to the Future Part 2, where they have to get the almanac from Biff, and Marty and Doc are trying to avoid their other selves because it's on the same day where Marty goes back in time to 1985. So they have to avoid their other selves in order to get the almanac back, because then it could create a time paradox. Similar situation in this one, and it leads to a lot of great moments, which I'll talk about later. But as far as the time travel aspect in Avengers Endgame, I like that they put a new twist on it, because let's face it, no matter what you do with time travel in a movie or a television show, you're always going to find a loophole to complain about. You're always going to find these little things that don't make sense. And they do mention quite a few movies that involve time travel, like Back to the Future, Star Trek, Terminator, Hot Tub Time Machine, which I'm really glad that got some recognition, and Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, although I kind of wish that Looper was mentioned in there too, because it does involve time travel. Now, what those movies suggested is that if you go back in time and change something in the past, it completely changes the future. It's one thing that's kind of echoed throughout all those other movies, but in this movie they tell you that, no, your past won't change if you change something, but what will happen is that you'll create an alternate branch reality. This is my own interpretation, that it creates a branch universe, like a parallel universe, where it's more or less the same, but it's slightly different. It's allowed to coexist with the main timeline. I do like that they gave it attention to detail, and they really made it a point to make sure that it was as idiot-proof as possible, or plot hole argument-proof as possible, but it's a lose-lose situation either way. It gets a little confusing, and if you're someone who's got a really critical thinking type of mind, you're gonna find these little plot holes and nitpick the hell out of it. Like I said, it's inevitable. I was able to understand it the second time around, but still, it's a little bit like, huh? Just as long as we don't run into our other selves and don't bet on sporting events, I'm gonna stop you right there. Are you telling me that your idea of time travel is based on Back to the Future? So Back to the Future is just a bunch of bullshit? Sorry. One thing I'm a little disappointed in, why didn't Spider-Man make that reference to Back to the Future? That would have been perfect, because if you've been following the videos and you see me mention in some of my reviews that he references Empire Strikes Back in Civil War and then Aliens in Infinity War, it's a Russo brothers Spider-Man thing, I suppose, but not the case in this one. I still wish he could have said, it's just like that old movie, Back to the Future. But still, they reference Back to the Future, so I'm okay with it. Oh yeah, I completely forgot. Hawkeye, he is now a vigilante known as Ronin. He's going around killing various criminals. Basically the Punisher, except without the automatic weapons. Ever since losing his family, he's gone on a killing rampage, and Black Widow recruits him, and he reluctantly agrees to help. He's become more and more humanized as the films have gone on. And I can imagine Jeremy Renner's pretty pleased with that. So they gather up together and work out a plan to get the stones. And there's plenty of moments like this in this movie. You could argue that it's just nothing but fan service, but the thing is, fan service isn't always necessarily a bad thing, because not only are you making this for the general public, you're making this for the fans who want to see this stuff. I like the idea of seeing the main characters going back to certain points in time, looking back on certain things that they said or did, like when Captain America faces off against himself and his past self says, I could do this all day. Yeah, I know. So Scott and Tony are following the remaining Avengers going down the elevator in order to retrieve the Space Stone. Meanwhile, Bruce heads over to Doctor Strange's house. The Ancient One is there, protecting New York from the alien attack. But then a long argument / talk ensues, where she says, no, you cannot take the stones and not give them back, because if you do, it's gonna mess up our reality and you'll create all these alternate timelines. So in order to preserve it, you have to bring the stones back at the exact moment in time that you stole them. So Bruce gets the time stone. Tony and Scott are waiting for the right opportunity to get the Space Stone. Tony dresses up as a SWAT guy. Scott infiltrates the past Tony's arc reactor and causes a heart attack, drops the case, he runs over and grabs the case, but the past Hulk, who was going down the stairs, inadvertently causes the whole thing to fail, kicks the Space Stone back to Loki, and Loki manages to escape with the Tesseract. It's one of the things that I wish they would have cleared up. Like, Loki manages to escape, and they eventually have to go back to another point in the past in order to get the Space Stone, but I wish they would have cleared it up. Like, what happened to Loki? Did that mess up the timeline? And I know there's a Loki TV series that's being developed right now, but still, I think a line of dialogue or two would have cleared the air on that, because it's never brought up again. They just carry on like it's no big deal. When Thor realizes that Loki's gone, it's like, where is he? Oh no, where's Loki? I can look past it personally because the rest of the movie is still pretty awesome, but still, I wish they would have cleared that up. And Cap has the Mind Stone, which is in Loki's scepter. He sneaks into the elevator where all these S.H.I.E.L.D. agents are at, like the guy who plays Crossbones, or Grumlow? I don't know how to say his name, but then Jasper Sitwell's there too, and that one scary looking guy, don't know his name. Seeing Winter Soldier, we all know that these guys are double agents for Hydra, and they're all getting ready to pull their guns on him because they're probably thinking he's Loki in disguise. Immediately, I had a flashback to the elevator scene in Winter Soldier before we get started. Does anyone want to get out? About to get ready for a fight, and he says, no, guys, the secretary sent me. Hail Hydra. Oh my God. The whole theater, the first time I saw this, the night before opening day, the crowd just roared. So he gets the stone, he's on his way out, but then he runs into his past self. And when he sees him off camera, he goes, you've got to be kidding me. And I'm like, what? And then you see his past self, and I went, oh no. Oh no. And of course the fight carries on, and he manages to get the stone back. That is America's ass. Scott, Tony, and Cap reunite, telling Cap that they lost the Space Stone, so they resolve to go back to the year 1970 in order to retrieve the Tesseract, which at the time was in S.H.I.E.L.D.'s possession, or therefore Hydra's. So they both head back in time to retrieve the stone and get more Hank Pym particles in order to suffice their trip back home. Meanwhile, on Asgard, Rocket sneaks into the room where Jane's at, being injected with the ether, and extracts the Reality Stone, but is then later chased by Asgardian warriors. Get that rabbit! Get that rabbit! I'm sorry, I've said it before, that rabbit joke is never gonna get old. And it's here where Thor also shows that he has panic attacks and extreme anxiety. You wouldn't expect to see that from the God of Thunder, but in a way, yes, it's played for comedy, but it's also another way to humanize Thor, which I also like seeing. It leads to probably one of the best parts of this movie, and probably the whole MCU. He actually gets to have a final conversation with his mother, portrayed by Rene Russo, because it turns out the day that they return to Asgard is the day that she actually died. If you remember from the second Thor movie, she was killed by the Dark Elves. And seeing Thor looking the way he is with his long hair and beard and his spear gut and his clothing, she quickly figures out that this is her son from the future. He tells her what's happened to him and she consoles him and says, "You messed up, yes, but you have a chance to fix your future. If you keep going on like this, that's all you're ever gonna be. But you have a chance now to improve yourself and make right on what you did wrong." And I think it was a very heartfelt moment because from what I remember, Thor never really got to say goodbye to his mom. We didn't really see that many scenes with him and her together. So for us to finally see a heart-to-heart conversation between him and his mom, it touches me personally. My mom and I have a really good relationship, so for me, I like seeing that. And he's able to get his hammer. He has one final goodbye with his mom, and he and Rocket head back to the present. Then Nebula and War Machine wait for Quill to show up to get the Power Stone, so he's an idiot. Yeah, more or less. They knock him out and they get the Power Stone. They get ready to go back in time, but then Nebula starts to freak out and the circuits in her brain start to go haywire because her past self is there along with Thanos and Gamora looking for the Power Stone. And her past self starts having the same effect. So Gamora and Thanos start to look inside her head and they see the memories from her future self. And Thanos catches on to their plan and comes up with a way to stop them. And he uses Nebula's past self to get her future self, bring her to him in order to prove her loyalty to him. This is the first time that I actually cared about Nebula because up until now, I didn't really like Nebula. I thought Karen Gillan overacted the heck out of that role. I'm really glad that Endgame finally got me on board with Karen Gillan as Nebula because up until now, like I said, I felt like she was overdoing it. Now, her character makes more sense. They finally show an emotional side to her. Hawkeye and Black Widow head to Vormir and they meet up with the Red Skull in order to get the Soul Stone. And he tells them the only way to get it is you have to sacrifice someone that you care about. So they ponder it for a minute and Hawkeye decides, you know what? I'll go. I'll do it. So he goes over the edge, but Black Widow stops him. She tries to go over the edge, he stops her. They both fall over the cliff. Hawkeye's holding onto the cliff and he's holding on to Black Widow. He can't hold on to both of them and she says, "Let me go. It's okay." And she falls and she dies. Black Widow dies. I'll be honest though, I kinda thought that Hawkeye was gonna die because that would make more sense to me. But on the other hand, I understand why. Black Widow doesn't really have anybody else outside of the Avengers. Hawkeye actually does have a family. He doesn't want to go back to his family with all the things that he's done. He feels like a self-sacrifice would atone for all the sins that he's done. And then there's also the argument, well, if Captain America returned the Soul Stone, wouldn't that bring Black Widow back from the dead? I don't know. I guess we'll never know. Well, on the other hand, Bruce Banner says when he snaps everybody back, I tried to get her to come back. I really tried, but it didn't work. I guess there's the answer for you. And it obviously leads to the question, well, what's going to happen with that Black Widow movie that's being developed? More than likely, it's going to be a prequel. I'm sure I've seen an article somewhere explaining that. Is it going to be Scarlett Johansson, de-aged younger? Or is it going to be a different actress? I don't know. We'll find out and see what happens. So Hawkeye manages to get the Soul Stone and heads back to the present. And Tony and Cap head to 1970 into that base in Jersey where Cap later discovers what was going on with Hydra and S.H.I.E.L.D. and Winter Soldier. They sneak into this base, Tony manages to get his hands on the Tesseract, and encounters his father, Howard Stark, who's just about the same age as Tony is at this point. And they actually have a conversation with each other. Howard's wife is pregnant with Tony. And this caught me a little off guard because we all know that Tony Stark has had some issues with his dad. He always kind of had this image of him, and it wasn't really a positive one. So he more or less held on to that image for a long time, but this conversation gave him some needed closure. In a way, he managed to reconcile with his father in some way. Gives him a handshake and he gives him a hug, Pretty awkward for Howard Stark, but it was still a nice moment. Cap manages to steal the Pym particles from Hank Pym's lab by causing a diversion, and he sees Peggy Carter. Looking back on it now, I think played a huge part in him deciding to go back to the past and living his life with her. But we'll get to that later. So they all manage to get the stones and they head back to the present day. Unbeknownst to them though, the past Nebula trades places with the current Nebula, and she sneaks back with them, traveling through time, and opens a doorway for Thanos and his army to come in. So they use Iron Man tech to create a new gauntlet, placing all the stones in the gauntlet. Bruce decides, no, it has to be me. It's got gamma radiation, and I'm the only one who can survive it. And before he puts it on, Tony says, okay, bring everybody back who's vanished. Change nothing else, and don't let my daughter disappear. So Bruce puts it on, but not before it really burns up his arm pretty badly. But he does the snap, and everything seems to be okay. But then Thanos bombs the hell out of the Avengers headquarters. Almost to the point where you would think that most of these guys are gonna die. Thanos arrives on the ground and waits for the Avengers to come up. Cap, Thor, and Iron Man charge after him to fight him. Hawkeye's got the gauntlet underground, and he's being chased by Thanos' aliens. Current Nebula shows up after talking with Gamora, talking her into stopping Thanos. And then they run into the past Nebula. She manages to get the gauntlet, but then Nebula kills her past self in order to stop her from double-crossing them. And that's another thing that kind of bugged me. She kills her past self. Wouldn't the current self of Nebula fade away? Because we saw that at the end of Looper in 2012. Time travel in this movie is different, okay, I get it, but still, it's like, what? Wait a minute, how are you still alive? But then there's the argument of, well, that's one possible future. Again, the more you think about it, it doesn't really make sense, but I'm able to look past all that stuff. So Cap, Thor, and Iron Man encounter Thanos and a big fight ensues. This whole battle, not just this alone, but the final climactic battle, this is probably the best superhero throwdown that I've ever seen in my life. And I've seen a lot of great superhero action sequences. This is definitely up there in the top 10. But Thanos decides, you know what? None of you guys are gonna accept what you have. I'm gonna destroy this whole universe and rebuild it from the ashes back up again. I am inevitable. And there's a point where Thanos uses the Stormbreaker to try to kill Thor, and then Mjolnir's off nearby, and it lifts up, and you think, okay, Thor's gonna use that to hit Thanos. But then it flies back past Thanos, and you go, wait, what? And it lands right into Captain America's hand. When that happened, I almost had a heart attack. Big payoff to that scene of Age of Ultron when they all try to lift the hammer and Captain America moves the hammer ever so slightly and Thor goes, what? Cap is actually worthy. We finally see the super soldier come out of him. Yes! I knew it. Again, the whole crowd just roared. Oh, God. But Thanos beats the crap out of Captain America and his army shows up and it seems like it's only Cap, Thor, and Iron Man left. And it's like, oh man. They're gonna die here. And Cap is ready to take his final stand, but then you hear a voice on his radio say, hey Cap, can you hear me? Cap, it's Sam, can you hear me? Cap, on your left. When I heard that voice, I went, oh yeah, Banner snapped. They're back. They're back. And Black Panther and his army and his sister and his mother show up through that portal that Doctor Strange created. Then the Falcon shows up. The remaining Guardians show up. Bucky, Scarlet Witch, Doctor Strange, Wong, and his army shows up. And then Valkyrie shows up with all the remaining Asgardians that were wiped out in the snap. And then Spider-Man shows up. I try not to do this in the theater so much, but I saw Spider-Man just off to the right of the screen as he was coming in. When I saw him show up, I went, Spider-Man! And the crowd started cheering. Oh my God. Okay, I knew they were gonna come back. I know that they were gonna come back. I just didn't know how they were coming back. And I really liked how they did it in this one. Oh yeah, and Pepper Potts shows up in an Iron Man suit. Just like the climax of Ready Player One, but with Marvel characters. Avengers! Assemble.
Hold up, wait a minute. Y'all thought we was finished? Victory is ours forever. Y'all thought that was rented?
When you see everybody heading towards Thanos and the music's going dun 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 dun. Yes! Yes! I thought the airport battle in Civil War was amazing. This is even better. Much, much better. And then later Captain Marvel shows up and destroys Thanos' ship and fights Thanos for a bit, and we actually get to see just how strong she is. While all the fighting's going on, Tony reunites with Peter Parker, finally giving him a hug, and then he runs into Doctor Strange in the battle and say, hey, you said there was one scenario that we win. Please tell me this is it. And Strange says, if I tell you what happens, it won't happen. They're all trying to keep the gauntlet out of Thanos' hands, and this goes on for a while all this crazy superhero action is happening. And it's one of those things where you don't even think this is possible, but the Russo brothers and the writers managed to find the right balance of all these characters. Because 20 years ago, 30 years ago, we would have said, yeah, this is not gonna happen. There's no way. But Marvel shows again that nothing's impossible, and they got the right people who know what they're doing. Thanos manages to grab the gauntlet, and there's a moment where Strange looks at Tony and does this. He charges at Thanos, grabs the gauntlet. I am inevitable. Clink! And I am Iron Man. And Thanos and his army are disintegrated into dust. But unfortunately, Tony Stark ends up dying. All that power eats his body up and he dies. I didn't know for sure who was gonna bite the dust, but I had a feeling that it was gonna be Iron Man. Let me tell you, both times I've seen this, I either wanted to cry or started to tear up. This recent time that I've seen it, I did tear up, especially in the funeral scene. And when you see the recorded message to his family and to his daughter, especially with the I love you 3000 line. Oh gosh, that gets me every time. Oh man. And you see this wreath of flowers with the arc reactor that says proof that Tony Stark has a heart going out into the water. The camera turns and you see everybody there that he's impacted, not only as Iron Man, but as himself, Tony Stark. From the Avengers, the Guardians, Black Panther, Hawkeye and his family, Ant-Man, Scott Lang, Hope, Nick Fury, Agent Maria Hill, Captain Marvel, and you even see the kid from Iron Man 3, played by Ty Simpkins, that same actor that's there. That I thought was a really nice touch. Tony Stark's sacrifice was very poetic, and Robert Downey Jr., yeah, he's wearing a CGI suit and is playing a superhero. I think he deserves all the praise that he's getting. Tony Stark, Iron Man, is the one that started this whole franchise. 11 years ago, when we saw those trailers for the first Iron Man, we're like, this is gonna suck. This does not look good. Oh my God, this is awesome. And for him to say the words, I am Iron Man, which ended the first Iron Man film, again, very poetic. I'm really having a hard time finding the right words to describe this, but it's really, oh man. And Robert Downey Jr., you did an amazing job. Thank you so much for your portrayal. It will live on for eternity. And it also makes sense as to why Strange didn't tell him what the outcome was. You said there was a scenario where we went, tell me this is it. If I tell you what happens, it won't happen. When I first watched this and he said that to Tony, I went, why? Why? But then after everything else happened, I realized, okay, I see why you didn't do that. Because had he told Tony, Tony would have hesitated and said, do I want to do that? What about my wife? What about my daughter? You can't take any chances by telling him the outcome. He had to be in the moment and not think about what was going to happen. And Thor appoints Valkyrie as the new leader of Asgard and runs off to join the Guardians of the Galaxy in order to search for the 2014 Gamora. Bruce manages to rebuild the quantum time machine, and Cap has to go back in time and return the stones back to where they were, and also Mjolnir. He says goodbye to Bucky and Sam, and they try to bring him back in 3, 2, 1. Nothing happens, and it makes you go, he's not coming back. But why? Then Bucky turns around and calls out to Sam, there's an old man sitting on a bench, and it's Captain America, an elderly Captain America, who tells Sam, you know, I returned all the stones back to where they were, but then I decided, you know what, I think I should probably start living the life that Tony told me to get. How was it? It was beautiful. This is the final appearance for Captain America, but he doesn't die. He did exactly what I predicted. He goes back in time to live the rest of his life with Peggy, and seeing how fulfilled he is in having lived his life with her, yeah. I mean, I admit, I'm a sap, but you know what? I loved this payoff for Captain America. It was the perfect way to do it. He ends up giving the shield to Sam Wilson, who he appoints as the new Captain America. And at first I was a little bit caught off guard by that. I thought, what about Bucky? But in the long run, Bucky was viewed as a terrorist, even though he was being mind-controlled by Hydra. People would have looked at him and said, why is he Captain America? He's an assassin. And yes, Steve has more of an emotional connection to Bucky. But seeing how Sam Wilson has been there for Steve since the events of Winter Soldier, I think it makes more sense for Sam Wilson to be the next Captain America. And the last shot you see is Cap back in the past with Peggy Carter having their dance at her house. And then the movie ends. Oh, and I almost forgot Stan Lee's cameo which was really cool to see. It looked just the way he did in the 70s, and this may or may not be his last cameo. I don't know if he's gonna have one in Far From Home, but still, it was nice to see him in there. Overall, despite some of my nitpicks with Avengers Endgame, this is an extremely satisfying conclusion to what they're calling now the Infinity Saga. It does feel like the end of an era. It does feel like the end of this universe. Now, I know that there's going to be more movies following up after this, and if they want to do more, that'll be fine with me. I mean, I'll stick around and see what they have to offer. But you know, if this really was the end of the MCU, I wouldn't really complain. I think it'd be a perfect way to end this. There's no post-credit scene. There's a little clinking sound at the very end of the credits, which is an obvious callback to the first Iron Man when Tony was building his suit in the cave. Just like the Return of the Jedi, Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 2, and The Dark Knight Rises, this is right up there with some of the best conclusions to a series that I've ever seen. And this whole universe, in particular, there's really no other movie series like this out there. Even with some of the films that aren't as good as the others, you have to give major props to the people who made this universe possible. There's probably not going to be another one like this for a long time. Marvel, Kevin Feige, and everybody else who had a hand in this in one way or another, great job. Thank you guys so much. So those are my thoughts on Avengers Endgame. Thank you guys so much for watching this, and also thank you for watching my reviews of the previous Avengers movies. I had a lot of fun talking about them. Comment below and tell me what your thoughts are on Avengers Endgame, and I will see you all next time.